The second track. Fields ripe for harvest. Jesus said to his apostles, "Look up and see that the fields are already ripe for harvest." Usually a less responsive social group, Christians who are willing to form a cell or home group. Some imagine that they could start cells with believers and multiply them. This seldom happens, for believers seeking fellowship usually have little evangelistic urge or opportunity. Often a more responsive social group are non-Christians who will open their home. This is what Jesus instructed the 12 and the 72 to do. Most non-believers have many unbelieving friends and relatives whom they will invite to learn about Jesus. So look for receptive folk amongst non-Christians. Usually a less responsive social group are the middle and upper classes. These folk sense less need of help from God. Many who have material means and social status, when they count the cost of following Jesus, choose not to do so. Often a more responsive social group are the poor or working folk. The poor are often willing to let God help them and will be pleased when Jesus answers their prayers. They are also less likely to suffer much loss for becoming followers of Jesus. So look for receptive folk amongst the poor. Usually a less responsive social group are the satisfied and comfortable. Rich or poor, many folks sense no need for more than what they currently enjoy. Some will waste your time discussing religion or spirituality, fitting Jesus into their own beliefs. Often a more responsive social group are inquirers and seekers. There are others whom God has been preparing to receive his good news, even while preparing your church members to welcome them to answer their questions. So ask God to bring you and seekers together. Usually a less responsive social group are evangelized populations. Where the good news is widely known and there are unbelieving Christians, there are more spiritually blinded folk who hold anti-Christian feelings and philosophies. Often a more responsive social group are neglected populations. The power of God often appears strongest where the need is greatest. In unevangelized regions, one meets both more hostility and more receptivity at the same time. So go first to the least evangelized. Usually a less responsive social group are the comfortable and peaceful zones. Where folk have few needs, they have little interest in finding God. Remarkably, most Christian workers often reside in more comfortable towns where they are less needed. Often a more responsive social group are the destitute and disaster zones. Where believers meet material and practical needs of populations at risk, treating all equally, showing no favoritism, many of those at risk respond to God's mercy. So get involved in meeting real human needs. Usually a less responsive social group are individualist cultures. Evangelism that seeks only to persuade individuals usually fails to win others. Therefore, church planting moves very slowly and depends on entertainment methods. Often a more responsive social group are family-oriented cultures. Most church multiplication happens among whole households. Members discuss the good news, choose together to trust in Christ, and become a new house church. So enter homes and evangelize entire families. Usually a less responsive social group are Modernists and rationalists. Western nations have come through 200 years of incessant propaganda touting naturalism, evolutionism, scientism, and rationalism, darkening minds to spiritual reality. Often a more responsive social group are the postmodern and millennials. Messages about God, a risen intercessor, power over evil, loving communities, and spiritual gifts make sense to those who value personal spirituality. So learn to relate well with millennials. Usually a less responsive social group are the socially marginal. Almost every new evangelistic effort and church plant will attract a few individuals whose character or personality repels others. Often a more responsive social group are those in family and friendship networks. The good news normally flows easily within social networks, amongst friends, relatives, neighbors, or co-workers. These also make strong churches that reproduce within networks. So let the good news flow through existing networks. Usually a less responsive social group are the culturally distant. It can take years to learn the language, gestures, cultural cues, and social etiquette that are required to communicate the good news clearly and to train church planters. Often a more responsive social group are the culturally near. Those church members who share the same culture or a similar culture with the local community can communicate in meaningful ways that do not offend needlessly. So raise up local folk who do most of the work. Many folk who will come to faith in Jesus in a second-track church would not feel comfortable in your main congregation. However, they will feel at home in their new second-track churches. Both your elephantine mother congregation and her rabbitine daughter congregations will maintain a loving relationship.